You ever hear a wedding band play while a bulldozer idles 20 feet away? The low rumble hit my chest before the music did, diesel mixing with fresh-cut grass and overpriced perfume drifting across my backyard like none of this was wrong, like none of this was mine. I stood there in work boots on gravel I'd laid myself, watching a white owl runner stretch across my lawn, chairs lined up in perfect rows, floral arches staked into soil I closed on 3 months ago, and right in the middle of it all, Brenda Whitmore smiling like she'd planned this her entire life. My name is Ethan Caldwell, structural engineer, the guy people call when buildings need to stand exactly where they're supposed to and nowhere else. And this house, this land, every inch of it, I didn't inherit it, I earned it. 10 years of overtime, 12-hour shifts, skipped vacations, all so I could finally own something no one could take or share or repurpose without asking. That was the plan, anyway. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into my driveway wasn't the decorations, it was the stakes, metal pins hammered into my lawn holding down a temporary platform, and that word, temporary, stuck in my head the way a loose bolt rattles in a machine you know too well. I stepped out of my truck, door creaking, boots crunching, and a kid in a tux rushed past me carrying folding chairs like I was just another vendor, not the owner, not the guy whose mailbox they moved 3 feet to make room for valet parking. Then I saw the sign, printed in gold script, Whitmore Wedding, Private Event, right where my property line marker should have been visible. I could taste it then, that metallic edge of something about to snap, but I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene, because people like Brenda count on that. They expect noise, emotion, something they can dismiss. What they don't expect is silence. She spotted me near the fence line, waved like we were neighbors sharing a barbecue, not standing on opposite sides of a legal disaster, and she walked over in heels that sank just slightly into my lawn, leaving marks I'd still be fixing weeks later. Ethan, she said, voice sweet enough to rot teeth. Isn't it beautiful? We needed a larger space than the clubhouse, and your yard just fits the aesthetic perfectly, like my house was a venue listing she'd scrolled past and decided to book without clicking contact owner. I looked past her at the setup, power cables running from a generator parked where my shed used to be, wooden decking laid flat over grass I'd just reseeded, everything engineered to come apart as fast as it went up. And that's when the second thing clicked into place, not the wedding, not the audacity, but the classification, temporary structures, all of it, by definition, by code, by the same rulebook I'd spent my career working inside. I nodded, calm, almost polite, because the louder the music got, the quieter my plan needed to be, and somewhere behind the string quartet warming up, I could already hear the sound that would end this whole performance before they ever said I do. I did not argue with her, not because I agreed, but because I had already learned something about people like Brenda Whitmore. They do not listen when you raise your voice, they listen when the ground under their feet shifts, and right then the only thing shifting was my understanding of just how far she was willing to go. I walked the perimeter slowly, hands in my pockets, counting stakes, cables, the temporary decking panels locked together with quick-release clamps, every piece of it designed to look permanent for a few hours and then disappear without a trace, except this time it was all sitting on land that was not part of any shared easement, not part of any community zone, just mine, recorded, surveyed, and stamped with my name at the county office. A man in a black polo with a clipboard stepped in front of me, asked if I was with catering, and that was the moment I knew exactly how invisible they thought I was. Just another body walking through a space they had already claimed. I told him nothing, just kept moving, because I was not here to stop a wedding, I was here to understand the structure they had built, and structures always tell the truth if you know where to look. The generator hummed near the back fence, extension lines ran across my grass, feeding lights, speakers, refrigeration units, all plugged into a system that was never permitted, never inspected, never approved for this location, and I could almost hear my old supervisor's voice in my head from years ago on job sites. Temporary does not mean optional, Ethan. It still falls under code. I stopped near the edge of the wooden platform where the ceremony would take place, pressed my boot lightly against one of the boards, felt the give, the way it rested on adjustable supports instead of a fixed foundation, and that single detail locked everything into place. This was not just trespassing, this was unpermitted construction. And unpermitted construction on private property carries one very specific right that most people never read far enough to understand. Brenda's voice floated behind me again, softer this time, almost rehearsed. We can discuss a small compensation after the event, something fair, something that benefits everyone, like she was negotiating a favor instead of covering a violation. and I turned just enough to look at her, really look this time, the perfect hair, the controlled smile, the certainty that rules only applied when she decided they did. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, and said, "You should enjoy your event," because that was the truth. She should enjoy every second of it while she still could, and for a brief moment I saw confusion flicker in her eyes, like she expected resistance and did not know what to do with calm. I walked back toward my truck, the sound of gravel sharp under each step, pulled my phone from my pocket, and scrolled to a contact I had saved years ago but never thought I would use on my own property, a licensed demolition contractor who owed me a favor from a project we completed outside Austin. My thumb hovered for a second, not out of hesitation, but precision, because timing matters more than force, and then I pressed call. The line clicked. A familiar voice answered, and I kept my eyes on the wedding setup spreading across my yard as I spoke, steady and clear, giving him the address, the classification, the confirmation that everything on site qualified as unauthorized temporary structures. Under county code, there was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle, the kind professionals give when they recognize a situation that is about to become very simple. "You want it cleared?" he asked, and I could hear the engine of the generator behind me, the clink of glassware being arranged, the distant laughter of guests arriving early, all of it layered over the quiet certainty settling in my chest. "I want it handled," I said, and ended the call before he could ask anything else. Because the details were already in motion, and as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the music started to rise, strings tuning, voices gathering, everything building toward a moment they thought they controlled, and I knew exactly when that moment would belong to me. The sun dipped just enough to turn the white chairs gold, shadows stretching across my yard like they had always belonged there, and the string quartet finally found their rhythm, soft notes floating through the air while guests filled every seat they had arranged without asking me a single question. I leaned against the side of my truck, arms crossed, watching the flow of people step carefully over the same ground I spent weekends leveling and reseeding, and the smell of fresh flowers mixed with cut lumber and generator exhaust hung heavy, artificial and temporary, just like everything they had built. A valet in a black vest jogged past me holding a set of keys, calling out directions like this was a venue he worked every weekend, and I caught a glimpse of my driveway lined with cars I did not recognize, each one parked with the confidence of someone who had been told this space was theirs for the day. That was the thing about confidence. It spreads faster than truth. Brenda moved through the crowd like she was hosting a charity gala, shaking hands, adjusting decorations, stopping just long enough to smile at me again, that same tight smile that said she believed this was already over, that I had accepted my role as the quiet neighbor who would not make trouble. I checked my watch, not out of impatience, but precision, because timing is what separates a reaction from a plan, and I knew exactly how many minutes were left before the first engine would turn onto my street. The efficient stepped into place, flipping through a leather binder, clearing his throat into a microphone that hummed slightly from the ungrounded power line feeding it, and that detail almost made me laugh, because even their sound system was a violation waiting to be noticed. The bride appeared at the far end of the aisle, white dress catching the light, guests rising to their feet in unison. A wave of fabric and expectation moving across my property like a script they had all agreed to follow. And for a second, just a second, I wondered what it must feel like to believe you can take something simply because it looks better when you use it. I pushed off the truck and walked a few steps closer, not enough to interrupt, just enough to see the structure from a better angle, the temporary decking, the support frames, the cables tied down with quick anchors that could be removed in minutes if someone had the authority to say so. The music swelled, the kind of sound that tells everyone to pay attention, and I felt my phone vibrate once in my pocket. Short and sharp, exactly on schedule. I did not look at it right away. I did not need to, because I already knew what it meant, and instead I kept my eyes on the aisle as the bride took her first step forward, careful, deliberate, trusting the surface beneath her feet without knowing how little of it was actually permanent. I reached into my pocket slowly, pulled the phone out, and glanced at the screen just long enough to confirm what I had already set in motion. A single message, simple, professional, on site in 2 minutes. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and exhaled through my nose, the air carrying that same mix of perfume and fuel, and somewhere in the distance, just beyond the line of parked cars and trimmed hedges, I heard it, faint at first, then clearer, the low, steady growl of diesel engines approaching, not loud enough to stop the ceremony, not yet, but enough that anyone who knew the sound would recognize it instantly. I lifted my eyes toward the street, then back to the aisle, watching as the officiant began to speak words about commitment and shared space echoing through speakers that should never have been plugged in here, and I could not help the small, almost invisible smile that formed at the corner of my mouth, because in less than a minute, every word about ownership, about promises, about what belongs to whom, was about to mean something very different than they expected. The first truck turned the corner slow, deliberate, like it had done this 1,000 times before and did not need to rush for anyone, the low diesel rumble rolling down the street just loud enough to slip under the music without breaking it, and I watched as a few guests near the back glanced over their shoulders, confused for half a second before turning back to the ceremony like nothing important ever arrives uninvited. The officiant's voice carried across the yard, steady and practiced, talking about commitment, about respect, about shared boundaries, and I almost appreciated the timing because every word landed harder knowing what was about to happen next. The second truck followed close behind the first, larger, heavier, its tires crunching against the edge of my driveway where the gravel met asphalt, and this time more heads turned, more whispers started. The kind that ripple through a crowd when something does not match the script they were expecting. I stepped forward. From the side of my truck, slow, controlled, boots pressing into the grass that was still slightly uneven from where they had laid temporary panels over it, and I could feel the vibration of the engines now, not just hear them, a steady pulse that cut through the music like a second rhythm. Brenda noticed it then, her smile tightening for just a fraction of a second before she turned, eyes scanning past the rows of chairs toward the street, calculating, adjusting, already preparing to explain it away like everything else. The bride paused mid-step, just for a moment, her hand tightening slightly around the bouquet, and the music faltered, one violin missing a note before catching back up, but the spell was already cracked. The first machine rolled into view behind the line of parked cars, bright yellow against the soft colors of the ceremony, its arm tucked in, its presence unmistakable to anyone who had ever worked around real construction. A man in a reflective vest stepped out of the cab, clipboard in hand, calm, professional, and completely uninterested in the event unfolding 20 feet away, because to him this was just another job site, another set of instructions to follow. Brenda moved fast now, heels digging into the lawn as she crossed toward me, her voice low but sharp. What is this? Like she had just discovered a problem she did not authorize, and I met her halfway, close enough that I could smell the same expensive perfume she had worn earlier, now edged with something tighter, something less controlled. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folded document, and held it where she could see it without taking it. The county header clear, the language simple, direct, unmistakable. Authorization for immediate removal of unauthorized temporary structures on privately owned land. Her eyes moved across the page, fast at first, then slower as the meaning settled in, and for the first time since I met her, the certainty slipped. Behind us, the engine idled, steady and patient, and the operator waited, not looking at us, not asking questions, because everything he needed had already been signed. The officiant had stopped speaking now, the silence stretching across the yard heavier than any music could fill, guests shifting in their seats, phones starting to come out, whispers turning into open confusion. Brenda lowered her voice even further, almost a whisper now. You cannot do this right now, and I tilted my head slightly, not angry, not raised, just precise. I already did, because this was never about timing for her, it was about permission, and that was the one thing she had never asked for. I stepped back, just one pace, enough to clear the line between the crew and the structure, and gave a small nod, the kind you give when everything is exactly where it needs to be, and the man by the machine lifted his hand in return, acknowledging the signal, while the low growl of the engine deepened just enough that everyone in that yard finally understood this was not part of the ceremony they had planned. The engine did not lurch forward, it did not rush, it simply moved with that slow, controlled precision that only comes from someone who knows exactly what they are allowed to do, and the moment the machine crossed the invisible line between street and lawn, the entire atmosphere shifted, like the air itself realized the rules had changed. The operator lowered the arm just enough to make contact with the edge of the temporary decking, not tearing, not crashing, just lifting one corner with careful pressure, and that single motion said more than any argument ever could, because it showed exactly what the structure really was, not permanent, not protected, just something placed where it did not belong. A sharp gasp rippled through the guests as the platform shifted slightly, enough to break the illusion of stability, and chairs scraped softly against the wood as people instinctively stood, unsure whether to move or stay. The music had stopped completely now, the silence filled only by the steady hum of the engine and the quiet clinking of glassware somewhere near the catering table where someone had frozen mid-step. Brenda stepped closer to me, her voice no longer sweet, no longer controlled. "You are disrupting a private event," and I kept my eyes on the crew, not on her, because this was never about her words, it was about the paperwork she had chosen to ignore. "No," I said evenly. "I am removing unauthorized structures from my property," each word landing flat. Factual, leaving no space for interpretation. Behind us, the crew moved with the same calm efficiency, one worker already unfastening cables, another marking sections of the platform, treating the wedding setup like any other temporary installation that had exceeded its welcome. The officiant stepped back, clutching his binder, uncertain, his script useless in a moment that had no line for recovery. And the bride stood at the center of the aisle, frozen between expectation and reality, the fabric of her dress brushing against a surface that was already being redefined beneath her feet. A guest near the front raised a phone, recording, because people always record when they realize they are witnessing something they do not understand yet. Brenda reached for the document again, this time actually taking it from my hand, scanning faster, her breathing just slightly uneven now, and I watched the exact second she found the line that mattered, the clause that gave me the right to act immediately, without notice, without delay, because the violation was active and ongoing. She looked up at me, eyes sharper now, searching for something to push back with, something to reclaim control. But control does not come from volume, it comes from authority, and authority was printed in black ink on that page she was holding. "You could have waited," she said, quieter now, almost pleading without admitting it, and I finally looked at her directly, steady, unmoved. "You could have asked," because that was the part she never understood, not the law, not the code, just the basic line you do not cross without permission. Another section of the platform lifted cleanly, revealing the grass beneath, still damp from morning watering, untouched except for the pressure marks where their event had pressed down on it, and that image seemed to settle something in the crowd, a visual truth that no explanation could compete with. People began stepping back now, carefully, quietly, moving away from the structure as it was dismantled piece by piece, not in panic, not in chaos, just in recognition that the space they were standing in was no longer what they thought it was. I took a step back as well, giving the crew the room they needed, hands resting loosely at my sides, the tension in my chest gone, replaced by something steadier, something earned, and as the engine idled and the crew continued their work with methodical precision, the entire scene transformed from a celebration into something else entirely, something grounded, something real, something that finally matched the truth of where we were standing. The rhythm of the place changed completely once people understood this was not a performance, not a prank, but a process already in motion, and you could hear it in the way conversations dropped from laughter to low, uncertain murmurs, the kind people use when they are trying to decide whether to stay or quietly step away. The crew did not rush, they did not raise their voices, they just worked, disconnecting cables, lifting sections, stacking materials in clean, deliberate motions that made the entire setup look smaller with every minute that passed, like it was shrinking back into the temporary thing it always was. The generator cut off with a soft mechanical sigh, and the sudden silence that followed felt heavier than the music ever had. No speakers, no hum, just the natural sounds of shoes shifting on grass and fabric brushing against itself as guests adjusted their footing. I watched as one of the workers carefully coiled a power line that had been stretched across my lawn, the insulation still warm from use, and it struck me how casually they had run electricity across property they did not own, like rules were optional if you dressed them up nicely enough. Brenda stood a few feet away now, still holding the document, her posture tighter, her movement smaller, like she was trying to contain something that no longer fit the version of the day she had planned, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost that polished edge. "You are making this worse than it has to be," and I shook my head once, slow, not dismissive, just certain. "No, I am making it accurate, because accuracy is not loud, it does not argue, it simply replaces assumptions with facts." The bride had stepped off the platform by then, guided gently by someone from the front row, her shoes sinking slightly into the grass where the boards had been removed, and the look on her face was not anger, not even frustration, just confusion, like she had been handed a script that suddenly did not match the stage anymore. A man in a dark suit approached Brenda, whispering urgently, probably asking what the plan was now, and that was the part that always fascinated me. How quickly control disappears when it was never legally yours to begin with. I turned slightly, taking in the full view of the yard, the chairs now half empty, the decorations already being taken down by hands that had put them up just hours earlier, and for the first time since I pulled into the driveway, I could see the shape of my property again, not hidden under someone else's event, but returning to what it actually was. One of the crew members approached me briefly, clipboard in hand, confirming sections completed, his tone neutral, professional, like we were on any other site, and I signed where needed, each line reinforcing the same simple truth: this land, this decision, this outcome, all of it was mine to authorize. Behind us, a few guests had already made their way toward their cars, heels clicking against pavement, conversations picking up again but in a different tone now, less certain, more reflective, and I caught fragments of words like permission and property drifting through the air, the kind of words people only think about when they are forced to. Brenda finally lowered the paper, her eyes meeting mine again, searching, calculating, maybe even realizing for the first time that this was never about stopping her. It was about letting her go far enough that the consequences could not be ignored. The last section of the platform came up clean, revealing the full stretch of grass beneath, slightly compressed but intact, and the crew stepped back, their work nearly complete, leaving behind nothing but the space as it had always been, open, defined, and unquestionably mine. I took a slow breath, the air now free of exhaust and artificial scent, just grass and evening air settling back into place. And for a moment everything was still, not empty, not ruined, just reset, like the land itself had been waiting for this exact point to reassert what it had always been. The yard felt wider now, not because anything had changed in size, but because everything that did not belong there was gone, stripped back to grass, soil, and the quiet outline of boundaries people usually forget until they matter. And I stood there for a moment just listening, no music, no generator, just the faint rustle of fabric and the distant sound of car doors closing as guests made decisions without being told. The crew moved toward their trucks. Efficient, silent, loading the last of the materials with the same care they had used to remove them, leaving no debris, no mess, just a clean reset that made the entire event feel like something that had never been fully real to begin with. One of the workers gave me a short nod as he passed, clipboard tucked under his arm, and I returned it without words, because the work spoke for itself. Signed, executed, finished. Brenda had not moved much, still standing near where the aisle used to be, her heels now slightly marked with grass stains she had not noticed earlier, her posture no longer commanding the space but reacting to it, and when she finally spoke again, her voice carried just enough to reach me. You embarrassed everyone, and I let that sit for a second before answering, not sharp, not raised, just steady. No, the situation did that on its own, because embarrassment does not come from exposure, it comes from assumption meeting reality in public. She took a step closer, lowering her voice, trying to pull the conversation back into something private, something she could manage. We could have resolved this after, and I shook my head once. Slow, deliberate, after would mean it already happened, and that was the difference she had never accounted for. Timing is not about convenience, it is about consequence. A couple walked past us toward the driveway, the woman glancing back at the cleared yard, her expression thoughtful, not angry, just recalculating what she had just witnessed, and I could see it spreading. That quiet realization moving from one person to another, not loud, not dramatic, just a shift in understanding. The bride stood off to the side now, surrounded by a few close relatives, her dress catching the last light of the evening, and for a moment I almost felt the weight of what had been interrupted, not the event itself, but the expectation, the belief that everything would go exactly as planned simply because someone said it would. I took a breath, the air cooler now, cleaner, and turned slightly toward the house, toward the porch light that had just clicked on automatically as the sun dipped lower, a small, steady glow that marked the space as lived in, owned, not borrowed. Brenda followed my movement with her eyes, and I could tell she was searching for something to hold on to, some argument, some authority she could still claim, but all of that had already been addressed, not with words, but with action backed by something she could not override. This is not over, she said finally, and there it was, not a threat, not quite, more like a reflex, the last line people use when control slips through their fingers, and I nodded once, not dismissing it, not challenging it, just acknowledging it for what it was. It is for today, because today was never about winning an argument, it was about defining a boundary in a way that could not be ignored later. The last truck door closed with a solid, final sound, engines turning over one by one, the convoy pulling away from the curb with the same calm precision they arrived with, leaving behind nothing but tire marks that would fade with the next rain, and I watched until the street was clear again, until the only thing left was my property exactly as it had been before anyone decided to use it. Without asking, and as the quiet settled in fully, I could feel something else settle with it. Not relief, not satisfaction, just certainty, the kind that does not need to be spoken because it is already written into the ground beneath your feet. The quiet did not feel empty, it felt earned, like the ground itself had settled back into something honest after being dressed up for a story it never agreed to tell, and I walked slowly across the yard, boots brushing against flattened patches of grass where the chairs had been, the faint outline still visible if you knew where to look, like a blueprint fading after the structure is gone. The porch light cast a warm glow across the lawn now, stretching shadows that belonged to the house. Again, not to rented arches or temporary platforms, and I could smell the difference too. No more fuel, no more artificial scent, just evening air and soil cooling after a long day. A few cars remained at the curb, engines idling as people sat inside, talking, processing, deciding what version of this they would tell later, and I knew how that worked. Stories shift depending on who is telling them, but facts do not move the same way. They stay exactly where they are placed. I reached down and adjusted one of the small survey markers near the edge of the yard, a thin metal pin most people would never notice, but it marked a line that had just been proven in a way no argument could erase, and for a moment I just stood there looking at it, thinking about how something so small could hold so much weight when everything else falls away. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the grass, slower now, measured, and I did not need to turn to know it was Brenda, because the rhythm of control in her walk was still there, just quieter, less certain, like someone recalculating with fewer options. "You think this ends with a cleared yard," she said, her voice lower than before, less performance, more intent, and I turned slightly, enough to meet her gaze without giving up the ground I was standing on. "No," I said, "it ends with clarity," because that was the part she had been avoiding from the beginning. Not the conflict, but the definition of where it actually stood. She crossed her arms, looking past me at the space that used to hold her event, and I could see the shift happening in real time. Not acceptance, not yet, but recognition, the kind that comes when the environment no longer supports the version of reality you were pushing. "The board is going to hear about this," she added, and I nodded once, not dismissing it, not engaging it, just placing it where it belonged. They should. Because boards operate on documents, on records, on things that can be reviewed, and today had produced more than enough of those. She watched me for another second, searching again, maybe for hesitation, maybe for regret, but there was none to offer, only the same steady line that had been there from the start, and eventually she turned, walking back toward the remaining guests, her steps slower now, the ground no longer responding to her the way it had earlier. I looked out across the yard one more time, taking in the full span of it, the way the light hit the grass, the way the house framed the space, the way everything aligned again without interference, and I could feel something settle deeper than before, not just the moment, but the implication of it, because this was never about a single event, it was about a pattern that had just been interrupted in a way that could not be quietly smoothed over. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the message thread from earlier, the confirmation still sitting there, simple, time-stamped, undeniable, and I knew this was only the first record in what would become a series, not because I wanted more conflict, but because actions like this tend to reveal more once they are challenged. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket, turning toward the house as the last of the cars began to pull away, headlights sweeping briefly across the yard before disappearing down the street, and as the night settled fully into place, I understood something with complete certainty. This space had not just been defended, it had been defined in a way that would echo far beyond a single evening, and whatever came next would not start from assumption, it would start from what had already been proven right here on this ground. The night did not end with noise, it ended with quiet decisions being made behind closed doors, and I could feel that shift before I ever saw it, because the next morning the air carried something different, not tension, not confrontation, just the weight of something that had already moved forward without needing to announce itself. I stepped out onto the porch just after sunrise, coffee in hand, the grass still holding the faint impressions from the night before. Not damage, just memory, the kind that fades but never completely disappears if you know where to look, and as I walked the perimeter again, slower this time, I noticed small details most people would miss, a slightly bent stake left behind near the fence line, a faint scuff where a platform support had rested, each one a quiet reminder that something had been placed here without understanding what it meant to remove it properly. My phone buzzed in my pocket, not loud, not urgent, just steady, and when I pulled it out, I saw the email header before I even opened it. County office, formal, time-stamped, The kind of message that does not ask questions, it confirms actions. I read it once, then again, the language precise, referencing unauthorized construction, improper use of residential land, and the requirement for review, not of me, but of the association that had approved something they never had the authority to approve in the first place. I leaned against the porch railing, letting that settle in, because this was the part people rarely think about, the part that comes after the visible moment, when everything shifts on paper, in records. In places where decisions are not based on volume but on documentation, a second message followed, this one shorter, from the contractor, final report attached, completion confirmed, site cleared in accordance with code, and I could not help the small exhale that came with it, not relief, not exactly, more like confirmation that every step had landed exactly where it needed to. Across the street, a neighbor stood by his mailbox longer than usual, watching, not in a confrontational way, just observing, recalibrating what he thought he knew about this place, and when he gave me a small nod, it carried more meaning than words would have, acknowledgement, not of conflict, but of clarity. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, not by mail, not formal in the way official notices are, but careful, intentional, and I knew who it was from before I even opened it. The tone already familiar in the way it balanced between explanation and control. I read it slowly, standing in the same yard that had been cleared less than 24 hours earlier, the words outlining a review, a meeting.